Topic is Reconstruction and the end of the Civil War. So we're at the point where we're about to transition from slavery to segregation. So the first thing we want to do is take a look at this particular scenario sheet. So there will be two students. One student will complete this side, one student will complete this side. And for the most part, what we're looking at is the post-Civil War time period where the slave has now been set free. So I don't recall which side is which. This section here may be from the point of view of the slave master, where this is the former slave. And for the most part, what we're looking at is the changing situation for the South. Eventually, these issues are going to lead to what becomes known as the South's desire for home rule. And home rule is going to act as a loophole around the 13th to 15th Amendment. So how exactly does that happen? You have to first look at the issues outlined here that are going to get to some of the deep-seated issues between the two groups here. You want to make sure that you have an understanding of the terms, as that is going to be something that at some point you will be assessed on. So for the most part, we're going to have 6 readings, and depending on the situation, your group may have to create a timeline or some sort of political cartoon. We're going to first begin with the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th through 15th Amendment. So when we look at this particular amendment here, we're talking about eliminating slavery. This amendment right here is about the right to vote. So here we are free. Here we have the right to vote over here. And this is looking at the states, whether or not the states, what can they do, as far as depriving people of life, liberty, property without due process of the law. And so this 14th Amendment right here is going to be key to determine whether or not the states are going to be able to find a loophole. So going back to some of the issues that we looked at, the Federalist and Anti-Federalist debate, from the Southern point of view, they're going to be looking at the 13th through 15th Amendments as an example of the big, nasty federal government passing legislation, and in this case, these 3 amendments that are going to change and alter the way the South is operated. Again, the South is going to want to have home rule, which basically means they want to be able to resolve the racial problem. So looking at the readings, you come to find out that after the Civil War, the South was split up into military districts. Here we see District 5, here we see District 4, District 3, and so on. So let's put a dividing line here. The North and the South, let's say that the Northern government is going to pretty much send federal troops to the South. And why are the federal troops there? To enforce the 13th through 15th Amendment. This is where that Federalist and Anti-Federalist debate comes in. Remember, the 1800 Democratic Party, the Party of Dixie, these individuals wanted to be able to have what becomes known as home rule, and they do not want the federal government telling them what to do. As we said already, the federal government has passed these particular amendments over here, and the federal troops are there to make sure that the South is complying. So I'm going to draw a couple of characters here. Let's just say this represents the freed slave. This is the soldier. I'm going to put a hat on him. And we're going to also draw a Klansman here. The Klansman may be somebody trying to harass this individual to deny any aspect of the 13th through 15th Amendment. So the federal troop is pretty much there to watch this individual right here. And you have to understand that particular point in order to understand why the Compromise of 1876 happened. So the Compromise of 1876 is about Hayes and Tilden running for election. When we look at the outcome right here, we see a pretty tight race. So here we're looking at the electoral votes, 185 to 184. Notice that there are 3 states in the South where you have disputed elections that are taking place. So for the most part, the 1876 Compromise, the Great Compromise of 1876, is about these 3 votes. As we've already established, the South is split up into these military districts, and their goal is to have home rule, which was the point of why I wanted you to complete this particular sheet right here, because it goes against everything that that the South would want within their society. And so when we look at this particular electoral college map here, the South doesn't have home rule because of those 3 amendments. And as we said before, the federal troop is there to watch the freed slave. So we can draw the man with the hat representing the federal troop. We can draw the freed slave. And we can also draw the Klansman over here. Remember, this guy is there to watch this individual. So the Compromise of 1876 is pretty much about these three states right here throwing their electoral votes to Hayes on the condition that when Hayes becomes president, he eliminates the federal troops, eliminating those districts and giving the South the home rule that they want. Why is the home rule significant? Because that is what's going to lead to the segregation laws that we are probably very familiar with. Then you also see where the Klan is trying to use violence to try to deny the 15th Amendment. You know, the 15th Amendment is guaranteeing the freed slave the right to vote, a former slave, and the Klan is pretty much providing an obstacle where they're saying you can vote if you are going to make it to the election polling booth, and that is going to act as a deterrent. You probably are familiar with some of the grandfather clause. So the Plessy Ferguson is another case that gets the South home rule. And in this particular case, we're looking at state law. So for the most part, once we see the districts removed in the Compromise of 1876, the South is on its way to having home rule. We already know that the Klan is initiating a lot of violence, trying to terrorize these individuals. But the Plessy Ferguson case is like the nail in the coffin here, because this is where you get the federal government to support segregation laws. So in this particular case here, if you're not familiar, we have a state law, and the state is arguing, the state law indicates that we have to have the separate carts. In this case, let's just say we have the white cart and we have the black cart. And we'll put the train here. Choo choo. There you go. All right, we get the point here. From the state point of view, they're arguing that their law is not a violation of the 14th Amendment, that they did not deny any rights. In other words, that the individuals are still able to get from point B to point A. We are simply saying, according to our state law, that you have to stay here. So in other words, if the individual tried to board the bus and they said, or this train, and they said, you can't get from B to A because of your race, then that would be problematic. That would be unconstitutional. That would also conflict with the 14th Amendment. They're simply saying you can still get to where you have to go on the condition that you were sitting in the appropriate cart according to the state law. So this is a perfect example of the federal government passing legislation. In this case, we have the 14th Amendment, and the southern states, the anti-federalists, finding a loophole around this that allows segregation and eventually the home rule that they desire. So when we have Plessy Ferguson pass, now it's like the federal government is supportive of these segregation laws, which is why we see a host of segregation laws that emerge. And when we look at this particular sheet, we see there's a law for nurses, buses, railroads, restaurants, pool, billiards, parks, amateur baseball, restaurants, barbers, intermarriage, and so on. So we'll look at these in more detail in a later class. A couple of ones that I did, zoom in on here would be like the law here, from Louisiana for the blind. Here we have another one involving circus tickets, where you have to have separate ticket booths for the two races. This one is an interesting one, and I like to always highlight this one. So here we have the state of Florida. So we have, the 14th Amendment. We have the state of Florida that passes a law that says intermarriage not allowed between black and white. So I can only imagine that this particular couple here, one party being white, the other party being black, comes to the realization that they would be violating this particular state law. So maybe they decide to live together. So they didn't get married yet, they are living together. So I can only imagine that the state in this case is looking at the couple and thinking, well, they found a loophole. Our law was here, and they found a way around the law by cohabitating. So then, of course, the state of Florida passes another law that says cohabitating, and before you know it, you are not allowed to live together. So we'll be looking at the civil rights movement from the lens of loopholes and tension between the Federalists and the anti-Federalists, which is an extension of some of the issues that we looked at from the early 1800s. We'll also be looking at this particular image here where you have to comply with your restaurant. So here you have the state of Alabama where they have a restaurant and you need to figure out a way to integrate. So if we look at this particular restaurant layout, how would you comply with the law? So the law is here. How would you create your partition to comply with the law? Are you going to have a white section here and a black section here? This is what we now need to figure out.